Guards hauled the starving kitchen girl the length of the grand hall, her bare soles skidding against centuries-old stone. A bruise, fresh, vivid purple, spread across her jaw. She did not cry. She did not flinch. Surrounded by sneering alpha lords, this beaten, half-starved creature lifted her gaze to the deadliest predator in the 5 territories, and held out a torn piece of coarse bread. "You look hungry," she whispered. For the first time in 300 years of cursed, frozen silence, the Alpha King's wolf cracked open a single eye. Before that moment, the royal procession had been a pageant of pointless extravagance. They came draped in silk and silver. His face held the hollow stillness of a winter crypt. Lady Cordelia of the Northern Ridge presented a sword. Its blade had been forged in dragonfire. Its hilt was wrapped in the hide of a white wolf. She knelt, offered it with both hands, her voice steady and thick with reverence. __quote_1__, she declared. He lifted one finger from the carved armrest of his throne. Halvard, the towering scar-covered beater at his side, stepped forward and took the weapon on his sovereign's behalf. The king never touched it. For 3 days, 47 women from the most powerful packs in the realm had arrived. Each one hand-picked by her alpha father to compete for a title every she-wolf in the kingdom craved. Luna to the Alpha King, Queen of Wolves, mate to the most powerful creature walking the earth. Kael Thornvane, Alpha King of the Iron Sovereignty, High Lord of the 5 territories, the wolf who had not smiled in 3 centuries, sat on his throne of carved black stone and felt nothing. Not boredom, not irritation, not even the dull weight of obligation. Pure emptiness. The curse had devoured everything else long ago. It started with warmth, sunlight against his skin, the comfort of a hearth, the dense heat of fur cloaks in deep winter. Then it stole taste. After that, color began to drain. The world bled into a flat landscape of greys and iron somewhere around his 2nd century. The affliction burrowed deeper still, gnawing at whatever remained of his capacity to feel. Joy disappeared first, then sorrow. Anger, the last sharp edge he possessed, eventually dulled to nothing. Now, only a vast, frozen quiet filled the space where a soul should have lived. His wolf, once a roaring storm inside his chest, had gone silent decades ago. It still existed. He could sense it the way one senses a limb gone completely numb. But it no longer spoke, no longer surged, no longer cared. 300 years of rain, 300 years of relentless ice. The 48th woman stepped forward now, another noble's daughter wrapped in emerald velvet, and Kael's gaze had already drifted to the window behind his throne. Grey sky against grey stone. The world beyond the glass was a mirror of the wasteland inside him. Then, a violent disruption at the back of the hall. The crowd near the entrance shifted. A ripple of whispers cut through the grand hall. Not the hushed deference that accompanied each noble's presentation. Something rougher, uglier, a scuffle, a sharp voice, the unmistakable crack of someone being shoved hard. Kael's eyes moved toward the rear of the hall, not from concern, because movement registered, and even a king buried in ice noticed when something broke the pattern. She was small. That was the first thing. Small and thin, wearing a dress washed so many times its original color was anyone's guess. Dark hair yanked back into a braid, half undone. A fresh bruise, edges blooming purple, marked her jaw. She made no effort to hide it. 2 guards gripped her arms. Behind her stood a thick-necked lord, Lord Maron of the Ashwood Pack, whom Kael dimly recognized. He jabbed a finger toward the exit, his contempt radiating like heat. Lord Maron spat, his voice cutting clean to the front rows. "Release her." "My king? You look hungry, mate." "Mate, what is your name?" "Elowen, I am no one's daughter. I belong to no pack. I came because I was hungry too." Lord Maron surged forward, his face twisted with outrage. "Your Majesty," he spat, "this creature is an Omega." "Lower than an Omega." "She was cast out of the Ashwood Pack for—" "Halvard." Cale's voice dropped to a register that made the torches on the walls gutter. "If Lord Maron speaks again without my leave, take his tongue." The silence that followed was not reverence. It was raw, animal fear. Cale descended the throne steps. He had not descended those steps for a single one of the 47 noble daughters. He had not left his seat once during the entire 3-day procession. Every wolf in the chamber understood the weight of what they were witnessing. Every wolf in that chamber locked rigid with fear. He closed the distance until he stood directly before Eowyn. The top of her head barely grazed his chest. This close, the bruise along her jaw told a worse story than he'd first read. Layered purple and yellow, the kind that comes from fists that return again and again. Her hands were rough with calluses. Her wrists thin as kindling. Wood smoke and wild thyme clung to her skin, and beneath that, something else. Something that made his wolf slam against his ribcage so hard he thought the bones would splinter. "You will stay." Not a plea, not quite a command. Something cracked open between the two, raw need with nowhere left to hide. Eowyn tilted her face upward. The gold burning in his eyes had already begun to dim, flickering like a flame, unsure whether it wanted to survive. She felt it then, the vast, bone-deep cold pouring off him beneath that single ember of warmth, a chasm of frost that dropped endlessly into darkness. "I have nowhere else to go," she said, voice low, "but I will not be kept." One corner of his mouth shifted, not a smile, the ghost of one. "Then stay because you choose to." She held his stare. Seconds stretched, then a single nod, sharp and final. Behind them, buried in the watching crowd, Lady Seraphina's fingers tightened around her chair's arm until the wood groaned in protest. And beside her, an older woman draped in black, Vespera, former advisor to the king's dead mother, arguably the most powerful female wolf in court. She watched everything unfold without a flicker of surprise, only the cold, patient turning of gears behind her eyes. They gave Eowyn a chamber in the east tower, sparse but clean, a narrow bed, a hearth, a window that overlooked the inner courtyard where warriors trained at first light. It was the finest room she had ever stood inside. She remained in its center for a long while, wind moaning against stone, trying to make the last few hours feel real. She knew about mate bonds. Every wolf did, even outcasts, even the ones raised in kitchen corners on cold stone floors. The bond was sacred, involuntary. The wolf recognized its match before the mind could catch up. But she had never shifted. Not once. Her whole life, they had told her she was broken. Too weak, too small, too damaged to hold a wolf inside her body. Lord Maron had built every cruelty on that foundation. The beatings, the starvation, years of invisible labor without rank, without protection, without a name anyone cared to speak aloud. If there was no wolf within her, how could a bond have taken root? She pressed her hand flat against her chest. Something had stirred there when his fingers grazed hers. A second heartbeat that wasn't hers, quick, fierce, desperately warm. A knock at the door. She opened it to find not a guard, but a small, round-faced woman with flour dusted across her apron and kindness settled deep in her eyes. "I'm Marta, I manage the kitchens. Brought you something to eat. And I wanted to tell you before someone else does." The last woman who caught the king's attention was Lady Thessaly. Beautiful, ambitious. She told everyone she'd be lunar within the month. What happened to her? She disappeared 3 months ago. Vespera said she left on her own, but her belongings never moved from her room. Her horse never left the stable. Be careful who you trust inside these walls. Not everyone who smiles wants you breathing. You can read, a healer taught me when I was 7. Lord Maron had the woman whipped for wasting time on an Omega. She kept teaching me after that, just in secret. What are you reading? A history of the Bloodfrost curse. Fascinating subject, especially the section on how it was cast. 312 years ago, a witch named Morwen cursed the Alpha King's bloodline after his father executed her daughter for unsanctioned magic. The curse was built to consume him in stages. First warmth, then sensation, then emotion, then his wolf. Then his life. She closed the book. It required a living anchor, someone close to the king, feeding the curse with their own vitality. Her gaze did not waver. Someone inside this fortress has been keeping you in slow decay, Your Majesty. For 3 centuries. The fire cracked, a log split apart in a burst of sparks, and the sudden flare caught the gold surging back through Cale Thornvane's eyes. "You uncovered this in 3 days," he said. Wonder threaded his voice, what little the curse allowed him to feel. "I uncovered it because I bothered to look. Has no one else?" The question sank like a stone dropped into black water, because the answer, the one he had never let himself examine, was devastating in its simplicity. No, no one had looked. Not Halvard, whose loyalty was absolute, but whose curiosity stopped at the sword's edge. Not his advisors, who managed the curse like a chronic illness, treatable, never curable, never questioned. Not Vespera, who had served 3 generations of the Thornvane line, who certainly must have. He stopped. Eowyn watched the realization move across his face like a slow crack splitting stone. She said nothing. She waited the way someone waits for a man to reach the edge of a truth he has spent lifetimes circling. "Vespera," he breathed. "She has been at court for 300 years, Eowyn said, choosing each word with care. "Since before the curse, since before Morwen. She was your mother's closest confidant, and your grandmother's before that." A pause. "That alone proves nothing. But when Lady Thessaly began drawing close to you, she vanished." Eowyn's voice held steady. "Marta told me. And tonight, when I asked Marta who assigned this room, this specific chamber in the East Tower, sealed away from the rest of the court, she answered with one word. Vespera." The cold inside Cale Thornvane's chest tightened like a fist closing around his ribs. This wasn't the curse's numbness. This was worse. This felt like the raw, newborn edge of fear. "Why are you telling me this?" Eowyn rose to her feet. She was still so small, still barely reaching his chest. But there was nothing small about the force behind her gaze. "Because you accepted my bread," she said. "And because I believe you have been starving for a very long time. And not one soul in this fortress has cared enough to ask why." He closed the distance in 2 strides. Not threatening, desperate. He stood near enough that the unnatural cold pouring off his skin prickled against hers. Near enough that his breath should have carried warmth across her forehead. But it didn't. His hand lifted, shaking, genuinely shaking, and hovered a breath from her jaw. "If I touch you," he rasped, his voice ruined, barely a whisper, "the warmth comes back, but it fades again. And every time it fades, the cold cuts deeper. The curse is fighting it." Eowyn reached up, took his hand, pressed it to her cheek, and warmth crashed through him like a dam giving way. Not just heat, sensation, texture, the impossible softness of her skin, the hummingbird-fast pulse beneath his fingertips, wild thyme and wood smoke flooding his senses so sharply that his eyes burned with tears. "Then we move faster than the curse," she said. Vespera struck the following evening. The grand hall had been arranged for the feast closing the procession. Noble daughters who still lingered held seats of honor, their gifts arranged along the walls for display. Cale Thornvane had named no Luna. The court hummed with speculation no one dared speak aloud. Eowyn crossed the threshold in a dress Marta had found for her. Nothing extravagant, deep forest green, immaculately clean. She carried her head high, every gaze in the hall tracked her path. Vesper arose before the meal was half finished. "I invoke the right of challenge." Her voice rang through the grand hall like iron striking iron. "For the protection of this pack and this throne, the woman called Elowen is wolfless, packless, without lineage or name. She is unfit to occupy this court, much less stand beside the king. I challenge her claim." Chaos erupted. Wolves launched to their feet. Halvard's hand found his sword by instinct. Chaol's fingers seized the arms of his throne, and the stone cracked beneath them. But Elowen spoke first. "I accept." Silence swallowed the hall whole. Chaol turned toward her. His eyes burned molten gold, his wolf thrashing inside him with a violence that electrified the air itself. "You cannot. A challenge means combat. She is a ranked wolf." "She will—" "I accept." Elowen did not look at him. Her gaze locked on Vespera, and her face held nothing resembling fear, only a bone-deep certainty that could not be shaken. Vespera smiled. The smile of a woman who had sustained a curse across 3 centuries, who had silenced anyone who wandered too close to the truth, who intended to dispose of this complication the exact way she had disposed of Lady Thessaly. "Dawn tomorrow," Vespera declared. "The fighting circle, before the full pack as witness." The hall drained slowly. Wolves whispered among themselves, eyes darting between the slight girl in the green dress and the fearsome advisor who had never once lost a challenge. Chaol sat motionless on his throne, knuckles bone-white against fractured stone, his wolf screaming inside a body that refused its voice. When the hall finally emptied, Elowen came to him. "She is the anchor," Elowen said quietly. "I am certain. 3 centuries she has fed the curse, kept you frozen, kept you manageable. And every woman who might have broken through, she made sure they were removed. Then let me destroy her." His voice was a leash about to snap. "I am the Alpha King. I do not need a challenge to—" "If you kill her by force, without proof," Elowen cut in, "the pack splits apart. Half your lords pledged loyalty to her before they ever pledged it to you. She built those allegiances on purpose. She must be unmasked publicly, in a way no one can deny." "And you think a fight accomplishes that?" Elowen laid her hand over his. Warmth roared between them, and Chaol gasped. A raw, involuntary sound ripped from his chest, like something caged, finally breaking loose. Color bled into the edges of his sight. Torchlight, not grey, orange, gold, alive. The stone beneath his palms carried texture now, rough, cold, unmistakably real. "I believe," Elowen said, "that when she tries to turn the curse against me in that circle, every wolf present will see exactly what she is." "And if she kills you first?" Elowen's grip tightened on his hand. Her dark eyes met his golden ones, and burning inside them was the quiet, savage resolve of a woman who had survived starvation, beatings, exile, and complete erasure. She hadn't hoped. She had decided. Survival was not a wish. It was a verdict she passed on her own fate. "Then you'll see the truth." Quote 68. "And you'll end it." He pulled her close, not gently, his arms locked around her, his face buried in her hair. Warmth tore through him like wildfire, like the first thaw after centuries of ice. He held her as though she were the only thing keeping him from falling back into the void. Elowen. Her name left his lips not as a command, as a prayer. 300 years I felt nothing. I will not lose the first soul who made me feel again. She pulled back just far enough to let him see her face. Her palm pressed flat against his chest, right where beneath all that frost a wolf howled and a man shook. "You won't lose me. I didn't walk into this fortress to die. I came because I was starving. And your hunger was worse than mine." Dawn arrived cold and grim. The combat ground was an ancient ring of standing stones crowning the plateau, a valley of black pines sprawling below. The entire pack had gathered, breath fogged in the thin early light. Warriors, nobles, servants, the high-born ladies who'd stayed to watch. Every wolf for miles had come. Vespera stepped forward and shifted, a massive black-furred beast, her eyes blazing violet with a power no ordinary wolf possessed. A murmur swept the crowd. She was enormous. She was magnificent. 3 centuries old, and the pressure of her presence pushed against the skin like a coming storm. Then Elwyn appeared, still human, a plain green dress, bare feet on frozen ground, no weapon. Lord Maron watched from the crowd and laughed. The Omega can't even shift. This ends in seconds. She's a Solaris wolf. Halvard barely breathed the words beside Kale. That bloodline was supposed to be gone. Vespera thought so too, Kale murmured, and there was wonder in his voice, a sound it hadn't carried in 300 years. Vespera hauled herself up and shifted to hybrid form, human torso, lupine eyes, claws out, violet energy snapping around her hands. Rage shattered her control, and the curse revealed itself. Threads of dark energy, like veins of black ice, crawled from Vespera's hands across the arena, over the plateau, into the fortress beyond. Every wolf present saw them. Every wolf traced them back to their source. 300 years. Kale's voice was quiet, but it rolled across the plateau like a death knell. You kept me frozen for 300 years. You killed Thessaly. You fed the curse that took my father. You let my mother believe her own blood was the flaw. Vespera bared her teeth. Your mother was weak. Your father was weak. This kingdom needed iron rule, not feeling. I held this pack together while you sat rotting on your throne and called paralysis power. You locked me in a cage, Kale said, and called it a crown. Elwyn pressed her palms together. Golden light surged brighter, scorching along the dark energy threads, hunting them back to their origin. Vespera screamed, not mere pain, but the sound of 300 years of hoarded power unraveling at the root. The curse broke. It shattered like ice, splitting across a frozen lake at the first breath of spring. A deep, resonant crack that rippled outward from the circle and crashed across the plateau like a wave swallowing the shore. Every wolf felt it. 3 centuries of suffocating weight lifted from the iron sovereignty in one cataclysmic heartbeat. Kale Thornvane dropped to his knees, not from weakness, from the sheer force of feeling flooding back into a world that had been numb for longer than anyone alive could remember. Color detonated around him, the deep green of pine needles, the blue-grey wash of morning sky, the crimson of Halvard's cloak snapping in the wind. Warmth, real golden warmth, as sunlight broke through the clouds and touched his skin for the first time in 300 years. Pine sap filled his lungs. Cold earth pressed against his knees, rough and real. He could hear every heartbeat in the crowd. Dozens upon dozens. But one rhythm rose above the rest. Steady, unmistakable. His wolf locked onto it with absolute certainty. Hers. Vespera crumpled inside the circle. The violet energy guttered and died. Her body seemed to shrink, centuries of stolen time crashing down on her in seconds. She looked ancient, truly ancient, for the first time. Guards advanced without waiting for orders. Kale Thornvane stood. He walked into the circle. The crowd parted before him, and the reverence in that silence, for the first time in living memory, held no trace of fear. Elwyn stood at the center. The golden light was fading from her hands. Her breathing came ragged and uneven. The power had demanded its price. Her legs shook. Tears carved paths down her cheeks. But her expression, fierce, unbroken, unbowed. He stopped in front of her. The entire pack watched. The noble daughters watched. Lord Maron watched. His laughter long dead in his throat. Kale Thornvane lifted the crown from his own head. The iron crown of the Thornvane bloodline, black metal forged in wolf fire. the crown that had seared the palm of every wearer for 3 centuries. He set it upon Elowin's head. It did not burn. It settled against her dark hair as though it had been waiting. In the morning light, the black iron glowed with a warmth it had never known. "Elowin," he said. Her name broke from him like a river through a dam, not weakness, but release. Luna of the Iron Sovereignty, my mate, my equal. The woman who fed a starving king and shattered chains the world called tradition. He knelt before her. The Alpha King, on his knees before a woman they had called nobody, nothing, worthless. Around the circle, one by one, the wolves of the Iron Sovereignty sank to their knees. Halvard first, then the warriors, then the lords, then the noble daughters who had offered sapphires, swords, and alliances. Lord Maron was last. His knees hit stone as though realization had struck him like a fist. The kitchen rat he had starved and tormented was the most powerful wolf he had ever stood beside. Elowin looked down at the king kneeling before her. She touched his face. Both hands cradled his jaw, and the warmth between them was no longer desperate or fleeting. It was steady, enduring, a hearth fire that would never go dark. "Rise," she whispered. "Kings do not kneel." "This one does," he answered, "for you. Always and only for you." 3 months later, the gardens of the Iron Fortress bloomed for the first time in recorded history. Not just the courtyard plots the groundskeeper had kept alive through sheer stubbornness. Wild gardens, untamed and impossible. Roses climbed the stone ramparts, ivy threaded through the battlements, jasmine spilled from window boxes that had sat empty for centuries. The fortress itself seemed to exhale, as if the stone had thawed alongside its king. Cale Thornvane stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, their chambers now, and watched the sunset blaze across the sky in colours that still stole his breath. Gold, crimson, violet. After 300 years of grey, he would sometimes stop dead in a corridor just to stare at the colour of a tapestry. Elowin found him there, as she often did. She leaned into him, and his arm folded around her, unhurried, unguarded, with the quiet ease of a man who had learned, slowly and with staggering wonder, that warmth would no longer be torn away. "A letter came," she said, "from Ashwood." Cale's arm tightened. His wolf stirred, not the old madness, but a low, protective rumble, as steady and constant as his own pulse. Lord Maron. His son. Maron has been overthrown by his own pack council. It seems tyranny loses its charm when the realm next door offers a different way. The son is requesting a trade alliance. He's enclosed a personal letter addressed to me. He offers an apology on behalf of his house for the mistreatment of an honoured wolf who should have been recognised, protected. Do you wish? No, I want to frame it. Hang it in the grand hall, right beside the piece of bread. You kept the bread? I found it in your desk drawer 3 days after I arrived, wrapped in cloth. The only gift out of 48 you had touched with your own hands. It was the only one worth keeping, he said. And the Luna of the Iron Sovereignty, who had once been no one's daughter, who had walked into a king's fortress with nothing in her hands and everything in her heart, pressed her face against his chest and listened to the heartbeat she had rekindled with a crust of bread and the fierce, luminous refusal to believe that a frozen thing could not learn to be warm.